He gave up his best mule so the Apache sisters could escape. Their father arrived before sunset. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A long time ago, in the rugged, dusty lands of the American West, lived a solitary rancher named Henry. Henry had inherited his family's land, but with no family to share it with, he spent his days alone, caring for his cattle and doing all the work himself. His only companion was a mule named Old Blue, the best mule he had ever owned. Old Blue had served Henry faithfully for years, carrying supplies and helping him with the heavy lifting around the ranch. But one fateful afternoon, Henry's life would change forever. It was late in the day when Henry was on his usual route, checking the fences around the property. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the fields. As he rode his mule along the narrow trail near the river, he saw two figures up ahead, struggling through the brush. At first, he thought they were just travelers passing through, but as he got closer, he realized they were two young Apache girls, covered in dust and with fear in their eyes. They were no older than 16, and their clothes were torn from running through the wilderness. The girls looked exhausted, their faces pale from hunger and fear. Henry instinctively slowed his mule, his heart heavy with compassion. He had heard stories of Apache raids, but these girls didn't look like they were part of any tribe on a mission of vengeance. Instead, they looked like they were fleeing, desperate for help. As Henry approached, the taller girl, with long black hair and a tear-streaked face, turned to him and spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Please, mister, help us. They are coming for us." Henry knew instantly that this was no ordinary encounter. Something had happened, and these girls needed help. The younger one, barely older than a child, clutched the older girl's arm tightly. "We have no place to go," she added. "They want to kill us." Without hesitation, Henry dismounted from his mule and approached the girls. He asked what had happened, and they explained in broken English that they were being hunted by a group of men who had attacked their village earlier that day. The men had burned their homes and left the girls for dead, but they had managed to escape. Now, they were being pursued by the very men who had destroyed their lives. Henry could see the fear in their eyes, and something stirred within him. He couldn't turn his back on them. They were young, frightened, and alone in this vast, unforgiving land. "Get on, Old Blue," Henry said, his voice firm but kind. "I'll take you to the river. It's your only chance to escape." The taller girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But the men will find us," she protested. "They will kill us." "Not if I can help it," Henry replied, motioning for them to hurry. "Get on." With little choice, the girls climbed onto Old Blue's back, their small figures barely making a dent in the mule's sturdy frame. Henry led them to the riverbank, where the fast-moving water would carry them downstream and away from the danger that pursued them. But as they neared the water, Henry heard the sound of horses in the distance, the thundering hooves unmistakable. "They're close," the older girl whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Henry looked at the girls and then at his mule. He had no choice but to make the hardest decision of his life. He knew the mule could make it across the river, but it wouldn't survive the long journey they had ahead. With a heavy heart, Henry helped the girls onto Old Blue and gave the mule a gentle pat on the neck. "You're going to be all right," he whispered. Then, he turned and ran toward the river, knowing he had to do what he could to give the girls a fighting chance. The next day, Henry stood alone, watching the horizon, his heart heavy with the loss of his best mule. He had given it up to help the girls, but now, he had no idea what had happened to them. All he knew was that he had done the right thing. And then, just as the sun began to dip low in the sky, he saw something that made his heart race. A small group of riders was approaching, and at the front was a man he recognized instantly. It was the father of the two girls. The rider approached slowly, his horse's hooves crunching on the dry earth as he drew nearer to the ranch. Henry stood frozen, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could make out the silhouette of a man, tall and commanding, riding ahead of a small group of Apache warriors. The man's presence was unmistakable, and Henry's heart skipped a beat. The man at the front of the group was none other than the father of the two girls, the man he had unknowingly helped. As the rider drew closer, Henry took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet him. The father stopped his horse just a few paces away, his eyes scanning the land before locking onto Henry. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sound that could be heard was the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees and the soft breathing of the horses. Finally, the Apache man spoke, his voice deep and heavy with authority. "I am Takakota," he said, his eyes studying Henry intently. "You helped my daughters." Henry nodded, his heart still pounding in his chest. "I did what I could," he said quietly, feeling an odd mixture of guilt and pride. "They were in trouble. I couldn't just leave them." Takakota's expression softened for a moment as he looked at Henry. "You did what no other man would have done," he said. "And for that, I am grateful." There was a long pause before Takakota spoke again. "But the question now is, what will you do next?" Henry wasn't sure what to say. The weight of the question hung heavily in the air, and he realized that his actions had not only saved the girls, but they had also brought him into the world of the Apache people, a world he knew little about, but could no longer ignore. He had already sacrificed his best mule to help them escape, and now he found himself facing the possibility of even greater consequences. I don't know," Henry admitted. "I just did what felt right at the time. I didn't expect any reward or recognition." Takakota nodded slowly. "You will not receive what you expect, but you will be rewarded in a way that you may not understand yet." The Apache father reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, intricately carved pendant, its surface glinting in the fading light of the afternoon. "This is a token of my people," Takakota said, holding the pendant out to Henry. "A symbol of our gratitude. You have saved my daughters, and now I will offer you protection. You are one of us now, whether you wish it or not." Henry felt a rush of emotions. The pendant, though small, held immense power. It was a gift, a gesture that spoke of something deeper than just a simple thank you. He had expected nothing in return, yet here he was, being offered a place among the Apache. He reached out and took the pendant, feeling its weight in his hand. As he did, Takakota continued. "But there is more at stake than your own safety, Henry. The men who chase my daughters will not stop until they have what they want. They will come for you as well." Henry's stomach twisted with the weight of the warning. He had been so focused on helping the girls that he hadn't considered the full consequences of his actions. He had unknowingly stepped into a conflict that could cost him everything. Takakota's voice grew more intense. "They will come with force, with numbers. But you will not face them alone." Henry looked at Takakota, trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Takakota's eyes darkened. "My people will stand by you. We will protect you, as you have protected my daughters." The Apache warriors behind Takakota shifted, their faces stoic but filled with a quiet resolve. Henry could feel the weight of their presence, their loyalty to Takakota, and their willingness to fight for what they believed in. Takakota looked at Henry one last time, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Your life has changed, rancher. But know this. In our world, the greatest gift you can give is to defend those who cannot defend themselves. You have earned the respect of my people, and we will not forget that." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a fiery glow across the land, Henry realized that his life, once simple and solitary, was now tied to something much larger than he had ever imagined. The Apache people had offered him their protection, their loyalty, and in return, he would have to give more than he ever thought possible. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. His actions had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of his life. And as the sound of horses moving closer filled the air, Henry felt the weight of the pendant in his hand, a symbol of the promise he had made, whether he was ready for it or not. The sun was sinking lower behind the distant hills, casting a soft golden hue over the land. Henry stood on the porch of his ranch, the pendant Takakota had given him heavy in his hand. His mind raced, still trying to process everything that had happened. The Apache chief had promised protection, but Henry wasn't sure how much he could rely on those words. He was just a rancher, a man who had chosen isolation over the complications of the world. Now, the world had come to him, and he couldn't turn back. As Henry stared out over his land, he heard the distant sound of hooves, growing louder. He knew the Apache weren't just going to sit back and wait for their enemies to strike. They had their own way of dealing with threats, and Henry had just become part of that world. A world where alliances meant survival. A world where a simple act of kindness could cost you everything, or give you everything. As the sound of approaching riders grew louder, Henry's heart began to race. He looked over his shoulder at the small cabin that had once felt like a safe haven, now feeling like a target. The ranch was no longer just his. It was now part of a larger story. He thought about the mule he had given up to save the girls, about the quiet life he had once led, and about what it meant to be part of something greater. Would he be able to live up to Takakota's trust? Would he be able to protect his land, his life, and his new allies? The riders finally appeared, a group of Apache warriors riding with purpose. At the front was Takakota, his presence. Commanding, his eyes scanning the land with the same intensity they had shown when he had first arrived at the ranch. Takakota slowed his horse as he neared Henry, his face unreadable. The warriors behind him dismounted in a fluid motion, their movements swift and deliberate, as if they were preparing for something more than just a visit. Henry stepped forward, his heart pounding. "What now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Takakota looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Now we prepare." "For what?" Henry asked, though he already knew the answer. "The men who hunt my daughters," Takakota said, his voice low and grave. "They will not stop until they have their revenge. They will come for you, and they will come for the land." Henry swallowed hard. "How do you know?" Takakota's gaze hardened. "Because I know them. They are men who do not rest until they have what they want. And what they want now is not just vengeance, it is power. They will use my daughters to take what is mine." Henry clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger rise within him. He had given up everything to help those girls, to help a family he didn't know. And now he was being pulled into a war he hadn't chosen. He was tired of being dragged into battles that weren't his own. But he had no choice now. Takakota was right. These men would stop at nothing, and Henry's land was the next target. "What do we do?" Henry asked, his voice steady now, a determination building inside him. "We fight," Takakota said simply. The Apache warriors moved with purpose, gathering their weapons and preparing for whatever came next. Takakota turned to Henry, his face softening slightly. "You have done what no other man would have done. Now, you will stand with us." Henry nodded, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. The quiet life he had once known was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. But in this moment, he understood. The world didn't wait for anyone to be ready. It moved, it shifted, and if you didn't keep up, you would be left behind. "I will stand with you," Henry said, his voice resolute. Takakota nodded, his eyes gleaming with respect. "Good. Now we prepare." As the night crept in and the stars began to shine, Henry found himself standing among the Apache warriors, preparing for a fight he had never asked for but now couldn't back out of. The sound of hooves in the distance grew louder, and Henry knew the battle was coming. He wasn't alone anymore. His actions had brought him here, and he would face whatever came next, not as a rancher, but as a man of honor and responsibility. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of change. The future was uncertain, but Henry was ready. Ready to fight for what he had now. Ready to protect the land that had once been just his, but was now part of something much bigger. The sun was fully set now, and a cold breeze swept across the open plains, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. Henry stood outside, surrounded by the Apache warriors, his heart pounding in his chest. Takakota had made it clear. The fight was coming, and it was coming fast. There was no more time to question his decision. The Apache warriors, their faces painted in intricate designs, moved silently around him, preparing their weapons and securing their horses. The campfire flickered, casting long shadows against the faces of men and women who had lived through battles and wars, their eyes cold with determination. Henry's thoughts raced. He had never been part of anything like this, never imagined he would be caught in the middle of a tribal conflict. But now, with the Apache warriors surrounding him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, a sense of duty to the people who had helped him when he needed it most. As he looked at Takakota, the Apache chief, standing tall in the center of the camp, Henry felt a shift inside him. This was no longer just about a ranch or a mule. This was about survival, about protecting what mattered. And for the first time, Henry understood that he wasn't just fighting for his land. He was fighting for a cause much larger than himself. Takakota approached Henry, his movements calm and measured, like a man who had seen the worst of the world and remained unshaken. "Are you ready?" Takakota asked, his voice low but firm. Henry nodded, trying to steady his nerves. "I'm ready," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Takakota gave him a small nod of approval. "Good. We fight not only for the land, but for our honor, and for the ones who cannot defend themselves." The Apache chief motioned for Henry to follow him as they walked toward the edge of the camp. The other warriors were gathered, their eyes focused on the horizon, waiting for the signal. Henry had never seen men so focused, so prepared for battle. It was a feeling he had only ever heard about in stories, but now, he was living it. As they approached the warriors, Takakota spoke again. "The enemy is not far. They are closing in on us." Henry's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped, deep down, that there might still be time to avoid the conflict. But it was clear now that there was no escaping it. The battle was coming, and all they could do was face it head-on. "How many of them?" Henry asked, his voice tight. Takakota's eyes narrowed as he scanned the distance. "They are not alone. They are part of a larger group, but they do not have the numbers we do. We will fight them on our terms." Henry couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence at Takakota's words. The Apache warriors had the advantage in experience and strategy, and Henry was learning quickly that he wasn't as helpless as he had once thought. He had already been tested, and he had made it this far. Now, it was time to fight. As the night wore on, the warriors continued their preparations, sharpening their knives and gathering their bows. The tension in the air was palpable, each warrior waiting for the moment when the battle would begin. Henry's mind raced with questions. How would he hold up in the fight? Would he be able to protect himself, protect his new allies? But as the firelight flickered and the warriors moved in unison, a sense of calm began to settle over him. He wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something bigger. He was part of the Apache people now. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of hooves in the distance. Henry's grip tightened on his rifle as he stood among the Apache warriors. The enemy was coming, and with the Apache by his side, he was ready. Takakota turned to Henry one last time before the battle began. "Remember, rancher, it is not just the land we fight for. It is the ones who will come after us, the ones we leave behind. We fight for them." Henry nodded, his heart steady now, his resolve firm. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for something much greater. The battle was about to begin, and Henry was ready to face it, alongside the Apache warriors who had given him a chance to stand strong once more. The night was still, the air thick with tension as Henry stood alongside Takakota and the Apache warriors, waiting for the inevitable clash. The flickering light from the campfire cast long shadows across the faces of the men and women around him. They were all prepared, each one silent, each one focused. Henry had never been part of a battle like this before, but he knew there was no turning back. He had chosen this path when he helped those girls, and now he was in it with them. Part of the Apache, part of something larger than himself. Takakota's voice cut through the silence. "They are coming. Be ready." Henry nodded, his grip tightening around his rifle. His heart was pounding in his chest, his nerves on edge. He wasn't used to this kind of life, but the events of the past days had changed him. He had stood up for what he believed was right, and now he had to see it through. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Henry turned his eyes to the horizon, trying to make out the shapes in the dark. Takakota's warriors, silent and deadly, readied themselves. They knew the land, they knew the battle, and they knew the stakes. Henry wasn't sure what to expect, but he trusted Takakota's plan. The Apache had always been known for their cunning, their strategy, and their ability to outthink their enemies. Henry hoped he would learn enough in this battle to be useful, to prove that he belonged here. As the riders appeared on the horizon, the tension in the air thickened. They were here, the men who had chased the Apache girls, the ones who had destroyed their village. Henry could feel his heart rate spike. They were riding hard, determined, and ready for a fight. Takakota's voice was calm as he gave his orders. "Wait for my signal. We strike when they are close." Henry swallowed, trying to steady himself. His instincts told him to run, to find cover, but he knew he couldn't. Not now. He had chosen this, and now he had to face it. The riders were close, their horses kicking up dust as they charged toward the camp. Henry's hands were sweating as he raised his rifle, his eyes trained on the approaching figures. Takakota stood next to him, unmoving, his gaze sharp. "Hold your fire," he whispered. "Let them come." The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. Henry could see the men now, 5 of them, their faces twisted in anger and hatred. They were riding fast, and it was clear they weren't stopping. Takakota raised his hand, signaling his warriors to stay still. The riders were almost on top of them now. Henry could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his body tense, ready for action. And then, just as the riders came within range, Takakota gave the order. Now, the Apache warriors moved in unison, springing into action with a speed and precision that left Henry in awe. They struck fast, catching the riders off guard. The first few seconds were chaos. Horses reared up, men shouted, and the sound of battle filled the air. Henry fired his rifle, taking down one of the riders before he could react. The others were quickly surrounded, outnumbered, and outmatched. The battle was over in minutes. Takakota's warriors had wiped out the threat with brutal efficiency. The riders were scattered, some dead, some wounded, and the rest had fled. Henry stood there, breathing heavily, his body shaking from the adrenaline. He had never experienced anything like this before. The rush, the fear, the exhilaration, it was overwhelming. Takakota approached him, his face impassive as always. "You fought well," he said, his voice low. Henry nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. "I didn't expect it to happen so fast," he admitted. Takakota gave him a small smile. "It never does. But you did well. You proved yourself today." Henry felt a sense of pride wash over him, mixed with the weight of what had just transpired. They had won, but at what cost? The battle was over, but the consequences would linger. Takakota looked out at the aftermath, his eyes scanning the scene with the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived through more battles than he cared to count. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice distant. "There will be more who come for us. More who will try to take what is ours." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. The fight had only just started, and he had no idea what the future held. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. He was in this now, and he would face whatever came with the same resolve he had shown today. The night had fallen quiet after the chaos of the battle. The Apache warriors were busy tending to their wounded, while Henry stood at the edge of the camp, watching the flickering firelight dance across the land. His mind was still racing from the fight, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had never been in combat like that before, and he was still processing everything that had happened. Takakota had led the charge, and the warriors had followed his lead with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Henry had fired his rifle and taken down one of the riders, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in his chest. The battle was over, but it was clear that the fight was far from finished. Takakota had warned him that more would come. Henry wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. The wind stirred the campfire smoke, and Takakota approached him quietly, his footsteps barely audible against the soft earth. "You did well today," Takakota said, his voice steady and calm. Henry nodded, grateful for the praise, but his mind was elsewhere. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Takakota's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "No, this is just the beginning. The men we fought today were only a small part of a much larger group. They will return, and they will bring more with them." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. He had known, deep down, that the battle wasn't over. But hearing Takakota say it aloud made it all the more real. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could handle. The quiet life he had known was slipping further and further away with every passing day. "What do we do now?" Henry asked, his voice low. Takakota didn't hesitate. "We prepare. We move quickly, and we stay ahead of them. We cannot afford to wait for them to come to us." The Apache chief turned and motioned for Henry to follow him. "The land you fight for is not just land. It is a symbol of who we are. We cannot let anyone take that from us." Henry looked at Takakota, his mind still racing. He had never thought of the land like that. To him, it was just a ranch, a piece of earth that had been passed down through his family. But now, it was more than that. It was a symbol of survival, of heritage, and of everything they were fighting to protect. Takakota's words settled in Henry's mind, and for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had gotten himself into. It wasn't just about the land, or even about the girls he had helped. It was about something much bigger. Takakota continued to lead Henry through the camp, where the warriors were preparing for the next move. They moved with quiet efficiency, their eyes focused and determined. Henry followed their example, though he felt more like an outsider than ever before. He wasn't one of them, not really. But as Takakota had said, he wasn't alone anymore. He was in this, for better or worse. The next morning, Henry woke early to the sound of horses and voices. The camp was already bustling with activity as the Apache warriors made their final preparations. Henry felt a knot form in his stomach as he walked among them, his thoughts still consumed by the events of the day before. Takakota had said they would leave soon, but Henry didn't know where they were going or what they would do once they got there. He was still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he had become part of this fight, part of a battle he hadn't chosen, but now couldn't escape. Takakota approached him, his expression unreadable. "We leave at dawn," he said, his voice steady. "The enemy will not stop until they have what they want. We must be ready for anything." Henry nodded, trying to shake the unease in his gut. "Where are we going?" Takakota's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, Henry saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't place. "We go where the enemy will not expect us. We go to the heart of their land." Henry's heart skipped a beat. The heart of their land. It was a dangerous move, one that would surely draw the enemy's full attention. But he knew Takakota had a plan. He always had a plan. "Are we ready?" Henry asked. Takakota nodded. "We are. But we will need to move quickly. No one is safe until we strike first." Henry's pulse quickened. The plan was set, and the stakes had never been higher. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of everything he had come to care about. As the sun began to rise, Henry mounted his horse, ready for whatever lay ahead. The road would be long and dangerous, but he was no longer the man who had spent his days in isolation, avoiding the world. He was part of something larger now, something that would shape his future in ways he could never have imagined. The morning arrived with a chill in the air, the faint light of dawn creeping over the horizon. Henry and the Apache warriors were already packed, ready to leave their camp. The weight of the journey ahead hung heavily on his shoulders. He had been part of this fight for only a short time, but it already felt like a lifetime. Takakota moved among the warriors, giving instructions and ensuring everything was in order. His presence was calm and commanding, and Henry couldn't help but admire the chief's ability to lead. Takakota's warriors were prepared for anything. They had seen their share of battles, and now they would face the enemy head-on. The plan was set, and there was no turning back. Henry's heart raced as he mounted his horse, feeling the tension building inside him. The sun was rising, and with it, the promise of another day of uncertainty. Takakota approached him, his eyes steady as they locked onto Henry's. "We move swiftly," the Apache chief said, his voice low and firm. "The enemy is near, and we cannot afford to wait." Henry nodded, trying to calm his nerves. He had been in the thick of the action before, but this felt different. This was not just about surviving. This was about defending everything he had come to value, everything he had chosen to fight for. The group rode out, moving quickly through the open plains. The landscape was vast, and every mile they covered brought them closer to their destination and closer to danger. Henry had no illusions about the risks ahead. The enemy was close, and they would stop at nothing to take what they wanted. Takakota led them toward the heart of the enemy's land, a place Henry had only heard about in whispers. The journey was long and grueling, but the Apache warriors moved with a purpose, their faces set in grim determination. As the day wore on, Henry found himself growing more comfortable in the saddle, his body becoming accustomed to the steady rhythm of the ride. He had always been a man of the land, but now he was part of something much larger. Takakota's warriors were not just skilled fighters. They were a family, bound together by honor and loyalty. Henry had never known anything like it. The group stopped for a brief rest near a small stream. Takakota signaled for Henry to join him by the fire. "You are one of us now," Takakota said, his eyes steady as he spoke. "But you must understand the weight of the path you have chosen. The enemy will not give up easily. They will fight with everything they have." Henry looked at the Apache chief, his heart heavy with the weight of those words. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Takakota nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "Good," he said. "But remember, this is not just about us. This is about our future, the future of those who come after us. We fight for more than just survival. We fight for honor, for justice." The words struck Henry deeply. He had always thought of his land as just a place to survive, to make a living. But now he understood that it was something more. It was a legacy, a symbol of everything they had fought for and everything they hoped to protect. As the group continued their journey, Henry felt a growing sense of responsibility. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a part of something larger, something that would shape his future in ways he could never have imagined. As the sun began to set, the group reached the edge of the enemy's territory. The landscape had changed, becoming more rugged and treacherous. Henry could feel the tension rising in the air. The time had come to face the enemy. Takakota gave the signal, and the warriors moved into position, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Henry's heart raced as he looked around. They had come this far, but now the real test was about to begin. Takakota's voice cut through the silence. "Stay close," he ordered. "We fight as one." Henry nodded, his hand tightening around his rifle. He was ready. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, growing louder. The enemy was coming. Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This was no longer just about land or survival. This was about fighting for a future, for honor, and for everything they had worked so hard to protect. The battle was about to begin, and Henry was ready to stand and fight, side by side with the Apache warriors who had become his family. The enemy was close now, their presence unmistakable in the thick dust cloud rising from the horizon. Henry could feel the tension in the air, a stillness that seemed to hang over the battlefield like a weight. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, each one poised, waiting for the signal to strike. Takakota, ever the calm leader, stood at the front of the group, his eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that Henry could not ignore. It was clear that the chief was ready. The question now was whether Henry was ready. Takakota turned to him, his gaze steady. "You know what to do," he said simply, as if he had been reading Henry's mind. Henry nodded, his hand tightening around the rifle he had carried for the past few days. He was no stranger to weapons, but this felt different. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore. He was fighting for something much larger, something much more important. Takakota motioned for the warriors to fall into position. The enemy was almost within striking distance now, and the moment of truth was fast approaching. Henry took a deep breath, steadying himself. The dust settled around them as the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of the approaching riders. Henry's heart raced in his chest as he steadied his aim, looking down the barrel of his rifle. The riders were close now, and he could see the anger and determination in their eyes. They were coming for blood, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Takakota's voice rang out, sharp and clear. Now, in an instant, the Apache warriors moved with lightning speed, emerging from the shadows like a wave of fury. Henry fired, his shot ringing out across the plains, and he saw one of the riders fall. The others didn't hesitate. They charged forward, their weapons drawn, their eyes filled with rage. Henry felt his heart pounding in his chest as he joined the fray, his rifle trained on the nearest enemy. The battle was fierce and fast, a blur of motion and noise. Horses neighed, men shouted, and the sound of weapons clashing filled the air. Henry fired again, hitting one of the riders as he charged toward him. The enemy was strong, but the Apache warriors were relentless. Takakota led the charge, his movements swift and precise. He fought with the kind of precision that Henry had never seen before, a warrior in every sense of the word. Henry moved with the warriors, his instincts taking over as he fought to survive. The battle raged on, the sounds of violence echoing through the open land. The riders were no match for the Apache, who had fought countless battles and survived against the odds. Henry could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on him, but he was no longer afraid. He had chosen this fight, and he would see it through. After what seemed like hours, the battle began to slow. The enemy had been overwhelmed, their numbers thinned by the strength and skill of the Apache warriors. Takakota stood at the center of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the scene with a quiet satisfaction. The riders who had once charged with such fury were now retreating, their defeat clear in the bloody dirt beneath them. Henry lowered his rifle, his body shaking from the adrenaline, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had fought, and he had survived, but he wasn't sure what had changed. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Takakota approached him, his face unreadable. "You fought well," he said, his voice low but steady. "But this is only the beginning. The enemy will regroup, and they will come again. We must stay ready." Henry nodded, the weight of the words settling over him. He had fought, and he had proven himself. But there was no time for rest. The Apache were always prepared for the next fight, always ready for whatever came next. And Henry would have to be ready too. As the warriors began to gather, tending to the wounded and checking their horses, Takakota motioned for Henry to follow him. "We must move quickly," Takakota said. "There is no time to waste." Henry followed the Apache chief, his thoughts racing. The battle had been a victory, but at what cost? He had been part of something larger than himself, something that had given him a sense of purpose. But the enemy was still out there, and the fight was far from over. As the Apache warriors moved out, preparing for their next steps, Henry couldn't help but feel a sense of determination. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for honor, for justice, for the future of the land he had come to love. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready. Ready to stand with the Apache warriors, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. But Henry knew that the true test was only just beginning. The night was quiet once again, the only sounds now being the gentle rustle of the wind and the occasional neighing of a horse. The battle had been won, but the cost was clear. Henry stood by the fire, the flames casting a soft glow on his face as he looked out over the land. He could feel the weight of the journey ahead, the responsibility that came with the life he had chosen. Takakota had been right. This fight was only just beginning. The enemy would return, and they would be ready. As the warriors settled into camp, Henry walked over to where Takakota stood, his figure silhouetted against the firelight. The Apache chief turned as Henry approached, his eyes steady and unreadable. "What now?" Henry asked, his voice heavy with the uncertainty of the future. Takakota regarded him for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Now we rest, but only for a short time. We keep moving, keep fighting, keep preparing. This land is not just our home. It is our legacy, and we will defend it, no matter the cost." Henry nodded, understanding the weight of Takakota's words. He had come to realize that this was no longer just about survival. It was about something much larger, something that would echo through generations. They weren't just fighting for their homes or their lives. They were fighting for their place in history, for the future of their people. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Takakota and his warriors moved with purpose, scouting the land, securing their position, and ensuring they were ready for whatever would come next. Henry, still learning the ways of the Apache, found himself becoming more involved, more attuned to the rhythms of this new life. His bond with the Apache grew stronger with each passing day, and he began to understand the deeper meaning of the struggle they were facing. It wasn't just about battle tactics or survival. It was about preserving a way of life, protecting a culture that had been under constant threat. As the weeks passed, Henry's role in the group became more defined. He was no longer just an outsider, a rancher thrown into a conflict he hadn't chosen. He had earned his place among the Apache, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. He fought alongside them, not just with his rifle, but with his heart and his spirit. The enemy did return, just as Takakota had said they would. But this time, they were ready. The Apache warriors stood firm, their resolve unshakable. They fought with the fury of a people who had been pushed to the brink, but who refused to give up. Henry was there with them, standing side by side with his new family, ready to protect the land and the people he had come to love. The battle was fierce, but the Apache emerged victorious once again. The enemy had underestimated the strength of the Apache people and their willingness to fight for what was theirs. As the dust settled, Henry looked around at the warriors, their faces covered in dirt and blood, but their eyes still burning with determination. They had won, but the fight was far from over. Takakota approached Henry, his expression still as calm as ever. "You have proven yourself," he said, his voice low and steady. You are one of us now. Henry looked at Takakota, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. I never expected this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm honored to stand with you. Takakota nodded. The fight is not just for us. It is for those who come after us. For our children and their children. We fight so that they may live in peace. Henry nodded, the weight of the words settling in his chest. He had come to realize that this was about more than just a battle. It was about securing a future, one where the Apache people could live freely, without fear. As the sun began to set on the battlefield, Henry felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had found his place in this world, standing alongside the Apache warriors who had become his family. The journey had been long and hard, but he knew now that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The land, the people, and the fight were all part of something much larger than himself. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Henry knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same strength and resolve he had found within himself. The future was uncertain, but he was ready. Ready to fight, ready to protect, and ready to stand by his new family, no matter what came next.